Rahsjon Duncan can change everything about Washington's secondary depth this fall.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers on this Monday. I want to take some time to talk about some of the top defensive linemen in the nation in the 2028 class. Yes, it's a long way off, but got some big time nuggets to get to there. So we'll talk about that later on. I also want to talk about some really important names to know in the 2027 class after the commitment of Isala Asuwiliava over the weekend. So we'll do a little bit of a rundown there. But before we get into that, somebody who I've really wanted to talk about for a long time, but because he wasn't here for spring practice, I wanted to wait. Talk about a little bit later on, is four-star cornerback Rahsjon Duncan. Now, a lot of you everydayers might remember this, where obviously he had a really late rise, where Washington did a really nice job of getting him on campus for that final official visit weekend and made a massive late push to get him after a couple other things went down on the recruiting trail. And he finishes the recruiting cycle as one of the best corners in the nation. When you go look at rivals, he was a top 60 player in the country. And I really do believe that he can throw a massive wrench into things this fall in the secondary in a good way, because I look at this room and I think there's a lot of talent where Jeron Jones was somebody who I was impressed by during spring practice. Obviously, Elias Johnson had one of the best spring camps of anybody, where Elijah Durr had some flashes. Ramonz Adams is somebody I'm curious to see what happens with if he sticks in the nickel a little bit, if Washington wants to move him back outside. And I'll talk more about those guys a little bit later on. And the reason I mentioned Ramonz there is because I think that with the impending arrival of Rahsjon Duncan, maybe they want to keep Ramonz in the nickel. Maybe you want to do some other things to just, find a way to get Rahsjon reps right away on the outside, where I think about him very similarly to what we saw from Dylan Robinson last year, where he comes in a similarly young and somewhat inexperienced room and just established himself right away as CB3 because of those high-end traits that he possesses, where with Rahsjon, the physicality is absolutely #1 on that list. But I think the biggest difference between Rahsjon and Dylan Robinson is that Rahsjon has just been playing defensive back for a lot, or full time, I should say, for a lot longer than Dylan Robinson. And I think that really helps his floor upon his arrival, where there are some things technique-wise that, there's still going to be some refinement, some different things that this coaching staff is going to say, all right, we got to fix this, whatever, that's fine. But the fact that he's just played that position at such a high level for so long is something that could just give him a little bit of a leg up on just where Dylan Robinson was, just again, to stay with this comparison at this point last season. And when I think about Jeron Jones, Elijah Durr, Elias Johnson, again, these guys who certainly made their impact during spring camp, they are a little bit ahead for that reason. But with the talent that Rahsjon possesses, along with the physicality and his fit in this defense, I think, we have to sit here and have this conversation of, okay, if he comes in and just wins one of these jobs behind Emmanuel Carnley, Dylan Robinson, that shouldn't sit here and shock anybody, because of, again, this floor that he possesses with just the understanding of the position already at such a high level that does really show up on film. And I think the physicality is another thing that needs to really be mentioned here, because that was one of those first things that you see when you turn on his high school film of, oh yeah, no, this dude just loves to hit, whether that be filling gaps in run defense, dropping back, where he's so versatile, where he's got that understanding of how to rotate into a safety spot from outside corner already, which is so important in Ryan Walter's scheme for some of these outside corners to learn. And then on top of that, again, it's not just filling the run and being able to tackle at outside corner, which is also so important in this scheme, but it's that ability to just be willing to go out there and not just go after the ball on every single play, but send a message to some of these opposing receivers, which is really fun, and something we saw Gavin Day do a lot on his high school film. We certainly saw him do a couple times over the course of spring practice as well. And all of those things are so important to just what the tone that this defense is going to want to set is. And I think that is something where when you look at how he could really just make a big impact this fall, it's in areas like that, whether that be on special teams or in the rotation on defense as a backup or whatever that role might be. All of those are things that I believe are just a little bit of a leg up on even some of these other guys in the room where, you could sit here and say, I think Jeron Jones has better technique. I think Elijah Durr is the best athlete in this group. And that's fine. All of those things are certainly very important. But in terms of physicality, I believe that Rahsjon Duncan has a major advantage there over pretty much everybody else in that room when you look at it, where I think that Emmanuel Carnley, Dylan Robinson, their experience is certainly very important there. But just in terms of that willingness to go out there and lay the big hit and having the technique and the understanding of doing that, I think that is where Rahsjon is not only more advanced, but that was really what set him apart on the recruiting trail. And it was why this Husky coaching staff, even though they, sent out that offer a little bit later on, once he was identified and once he was a more, important part of that process and just turned into a bigger target, I should say, it's why things came to fruition so quickly. You saw all those things, and I remember saying this at the time, the rankings didn't matter. Whatever it was didn't matter. It's that kid is a ball player, and that kid is going to go out there and do exactly what you want. He fits the scheme very well and has the size, the length, the physicality, all those measurables to say, oh, okay, yeah, he checks all these boxes, and on top of that, he fits everything else we want to do really well. It's a no-brainer to go out there and try to pursue this guy. So I look at what Rahsjon can do this fall, and it always feels a little weird to say all of these things and talk this big game about a freshman, but it's something that I remember asking Ryan Walters about last fall during the pre-fall practice media day. I should say about Ryland Dillard-Allen, and I said, we're hearing all these good things about him. What is it going to take to get on the field for you as a defensive coordinator? And the first thing he said to me was, if a freshman shows me that they're ready, I have no reservations about putting them out there. I'm not afraid to do that. And that's something we saw last year. It's something we're going to see this year from Derek Coleman-Brusa, from Cody Green on the offensive side of the ball, on several other guys along this defensive line, Ramzak Fruin, JD Hill, right? Like Gavin Day in the secondary, probably another one of these corners, whether it be Jeron Jones or Elijah Durr. We are going to see that from a lot of these guys. And it's very clear that is how this coaching staff also feels about Rahsjon Duncan. So the more that I look at what this is going to look like moving forward, he's just one of those guys that is going to be a big part of this plan, because, I look at a guy like Elias Johnson, and if he locks down one of those backup jobs this coming fall, great. That's somebody who just thrived during spring practice. And if he keeps that up during fall camp, he absolutely earned that. But if we see Rahsjon Duncan come in here and just look like the caliber of prospect that he's been billed to be, and when you look at his film, it's clear why, and he beats out whoever it is at the other outside corner spot, Elijah Durr, Jeron Jones. Again, if Ramonz Adams is part of that mix, that's something else to keep an eye on. But the ceiling that Rahsjon Duncan brings is so enticing. And I think that's really important to talk about, because he's ranked where he is for a reason. When you just look at the upside and the athleticism and all of these different traits that he brings to the table. But I think it's the floor that really sets him apart in terms of being 6'1", 185 pounds, and just already having that again, willingness to go tackle and run support, that willingness to lay a big hit on a receiver coming into his area. And sometimes it's going to lead to a mistake here or there, but if he shows that he can earn the trust of Ryan Walters, John Richardson, Taylor Mays, this defensive coaching staff, this is one of those guys who can absolutely find a way to make an early impact for this Husky team as part of a rotation, because this defensive backfield is so much fun to watch. Whether it's these starting safeties and Alex McLaughlin and Ryland Dillard-Allen, Paul Menke, Gavin Day, Raheem Wright, all made some kind of big impact during spring practice. And you can look at it with this cornerback group as well. And adding a talent like Rahsjon to that room is so much fun to think about. And it's why we got to spend so much time on this show talking recruiting. So let's get into some of these other big time 2027 targets. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here and every possession matters. If you're looking to get even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. Turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets just for getting started. I like using FanDuel during the playoffs because everything I need is right there in one place. You can check stats, trends, and matchups before making your picks, which makes the whole experience feel a whole lot more informed. Whether you're looking at player props or just following your favorite stars, it adds another level of excitement to every game. It's a really easy app to navigate, and it makes playoff basketball even more engaging from start to finish. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Now with Isala Asa Wiliava in the boat, that's one of your top targets overall off the board. And that's great to see from this coaching staff. So a couple of names right off the top we mentioned on the bonus show over the weekend. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you do, because it's got a whole lot of stuff about Isala and then the rest of the class and some of these top targets that I'm just going to mention very briefly right now, like 4-star defensive tackle Tavita Nonu, and then 4-star offensive lineman DeJon Yarborough and Jacoba Doyle, where again, with Isala off the board now, I feel like Tavita might be the number one overall target for this coaching staff. And then Yarborough and Doyle are the two guys who might be right behind him. It's just as Washington continues to try to build everything up in the trenches, these are the kinds of players that you need to secure in every single class, just to continue adding that physicality, that size, that strength that you need to succeed with the best teams in the Big Ten. So I wanted to mention those guys right off the top because I wanted to dive in some guys who maybe we haven't necessarily discussed in depth in a while. And I want to start at outside cornerback, specifically with Jalen Hill and Camille Loud, because Sincere Gaylord is another guy who I'd throw in that other group of guys that are right there at the very top of the board. But I feel that Jalen Hill and Camille Loud are not too far behind them. And I'd even throw Crean Lutheran's Evan Mack into this category as well, where when you look at the film of all three of these dudes, it's very clear why they fit in. And this is something we discussed with Isala the other day, where it's not just these check boxes of, oh, okay, yeah, this guy's got the long arms that we want, his 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", whatever, so we can play that aggressive press man style corner coverage that John Richardson likes to teach, that Ryan Walters likes to call, all of those sorts of things as well. No, these are the kinds of guys with suffocating rare bodies that, you know, the NFL covets. We just saw what that looked like with Ephesians Prysock and Takario Davis, and trying to find as many of those guys that you can get into the room as possible is so important. And I want to start with Camille Loud here because he is somebody who I think is very technically sound when you look at his film, and is somebody that the more I watch him, the more I like him, and the more he continues to rise, where we've seen him get that 4th star on the 247 Sports composite rankings. And then you go and you look at the visits that he's got set right now. He's got up to 26 offers. Arizona State and Utah are the only two other visits that he's got set, but he's had some big time programs in pursuit of him as well, where North Carolina's in the mix, Miami, some of these other schools that it feels like in the mix for all these guys that UW has been in the mix for, like Arizona, Auburn, BYU, Cal, Florida State. There have been a whole lot of programs that have shown a significant amount of interest in Camille Loud, especially over these last couple of months. And now that this is a guy who's got that Navy All-American invite, I think that he's someone who's just going to continue to rise. And with the way that he fits into this scheme, I don't know if a lot of the guys that I'm mentioning at outside corner are necessarily the impact sort or right away impact sort of player that we saw from Rahsjon Duncan, that Dylan Robinson was able to be. But in terms of the potential and the upside, they're right there with the Jeron Joneses of the world, the Elijah Durrs, where these sorts of guys that if they play early because of the size and the athleticism and some of these other traits that they have, it's not necessarily going to be the most shocking thing in the world, I'd say. But in terms of, you know, the body type and all that, that's way more important. And if these guys, again, force their way onto the field, nobody's going to be mad about that. But in terms of where this room sits right now, as Washington continues to try to build and establish this depth at outside corner, which for the last few years has been a little bit questionable just because there are so many young guys in that room, I think that having these guys that you're going to bring in, since you have to obviously restock it every year, having them be guys where maybe they're a little bit further away for one reason or another isn't a bad thing. Where again, if you get some of these impact players that can come in and force their way onto the field, you figure that out as you go along. But I just really like the way that things are shaping up and where Ryan Walters, John Richardson, Taylor Mays have gotten this coaching staff just in with some of their top targets and with some of these guys that can just really fit in well with what Ryan Walters wants to do on the back end of the defense. So sticking on the defensive side, I want to move up front and talk about one name in particular And that's someone who we've talked a little bit about over the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to spend a few minutes on him specifically. And that's 3-star defensive lineman Josh Christensen from Lake Oswego High School down in Oregon. And this is somebody where I've been very intrigued to watch this process play out, because it's been a little bit of a slow burn for Washington, this coaching staff, where it was very clear that the interest was there when he was on campus for junior day. And then he comes back for a spring practice really early on, gets that offer, comes back for the spring game in early May, and now he's got his official visit set up for the end of the month. So it's very clear that there is a lot of mutual interest here. But again, this is somebody who is also just rising very quickly. He took an official visit to Illinois in mid-April, and then he's got visits set up with Utah. Oregon is in there. There's one with Northwestern as well. There are a couple others that he decided to cancel to visit these Big Ten programs instead, like Wazoo, Oregon State, I believe, was also in the mix. But when I look at what Josh Christensen brings to the table, he is this perfect sort of developmental defensive lineman where you take a body like that and you see what happens. At 6'6", 250 pounds, you see the size, the motor, the athleticism, all of these sorts of things on film. And then you look at the way he combats blocks and destructs them on film, whether it be on the edge, on the interior. That's the sort of player that Ryan Walters is looking for in this defense, where he's one of those guys where if it's, like Derek Coleman-Brusa, it's okay, he's 250 pounds right now, and oh, look at him, he's carrying 280, 285, and maybe isn't going to fit as well on the edge as we might think. Okay, we're going to move him into the interior, see what that looks like there. Or, oh, okay, 260 might be the best playing weight for this guy. Let's keep him on the edge. He can be a really strong edge setter. We see what happens from there. That's also a possibility. And as his recruitment continues on, it looks like this is just going to wind up being another one of those UW-Oregon battles. So I'm curious to see if the in-state just poll of Oregon is what's going to win the day here, or if the Huskies, who have certainly done a very good job of building a relationship with him, and Christensen being another one of those guys where, a lot like Matamatagi Uyunglele, in terms of we might not see him on the field right away, but is somebody else in terms of the David Schwerzels of the world. If you let him sit for a year, maybe, add that weight to his frame and then see what he looks like a year down the line, that's great. And that's something you can work with, because when you combine those sorts of players with the John Ioanes, and let's throw them into this category with the crystal balls and everything, and Tavita Nonus of the world, that's how you can build a successful defensive line. And you want to continue to add that high-end talent. That might be a little further down the road, in terms of what else you might need, but we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So stay tuned. But I look at what Josh Christensen can bring to the table, and he's somebody where, as Washington's pursuit of him has continued, I'm curious to see what it's going to look like over the next month or two. And if the Huskies have what it takes to, I don't want to say have what it takes actually, but just if their pitch is going to be what wins the day for this particular player, where it's just another one of these guys that, you look at him and, oh, okay, he could fit here, he could fit there, because we've seen this story play out now a couple of different times for Washington. They've won a couple, they've lost a couple. Just another one to keep an eye on there. But let's move out to wide receiver, where really quickly, I want to talk about Zion White, where this is a new name that Washington is going to be bringing on campus for an official visit on June 19th. And this is somebody who, at 6'4", 199 pounds, is just another one of those big outside X receiver sort of targets. And you look at the rankings, one of the top 200 players in the country, number 164 overall, number 22 wide receiver, according to 247. He's got 3 official visits set up right now. It's North Carolina, it's Cal, and it's UW. And this was one that I saw, and I was looking, I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I think that in terms of where Washington is sitting right now at the wide receiver position, I think he's just a step behind in terms of just targets, where we know that the top of the board is Trey Moore, and then Osani Gales are right there. And then not too far behind those guys is Dontay Tyson, who's down to 2 schools. We'll talk about him in just a second. But with Zion White in particular, you like the film, you like the skills, but I think he's a little bit further away from seeing the field regularly at the college level compared to some of these other guys. So I'm curious to see what happens over the next month or 6 weeks or whatever, because if this is somebody where, let's say, he takes this visit to Cal on June 5th and winds up committing, I think that that's not necessarily going to be the most shocking thing in the world for me personally, because I just look at not just these other targets that Washington is in on, but where they sit with some of these other guys. And let's bring up Dontay Tyson as an example of that, the 4-star wide receiver from Peoria High School down in Arizona. this is a guy the Huskies have been in on for a lot longer. And at 6'1", 190 pounds, when you watch that film in terms of the size, the speed, the skill set, the route running ability that he possesses at this point in time, I think that he might be a little bit of a better fit right now in terms of what Washington is looking for, and just provides a little bit more of that. Okay, if you need this guy to get on the field right away, he's going to provide that. Whereas with Rahsjon White, I think he needs to get a little bit stronger. And I'm not saying this is a knock. I'm just saying in terms of with what Washington has particularly looked for at wide receiver, when you look at what we saw from these freshmen this spring in Jordan Clay, Trez Davis, Mason James, what we saw from Chris Lawson and Raiden Weisbright last spring, and Desmond Roebuck last fall, just where those guys were compared to where somebody like Rahsjon White is right now, I think that Washington is just in more of a, all right, if we can get some of these guys on the field, we're going to do that right away. So I want to keep a close eye on him because things can always change, but I think that Trey Moore is just going to continue to remain as that top overall target on the board at wide receiver, with Osani and Dontay Tyson right behind them. And then Rahsjon White is going to hang around in that mix. And if things fall one way or another, maybe we'll see that. But with Dontay Tyson, especially being down to Washington and Texas A&M with official visits looming very, very shortly, I feel that those are the kinds of guys that I'm going to be keeping a much closer eye on at this point in time. A lot like 2 5-star defensive linemen from the state of Arizona that the Huskies are doing a tremendous job with. So I reported this on Huskies Wire the other day, but over the weekend, Washington hosted one of the nation's elite defensive linemen in the 2028 class for an unofficial visit. That's 5-star Landen Wade from Basha High School down in Arizona. He's ranked as the number 20 overall player, number 7 edge rusher in the country by the 247 Sports Composite at 6'5", 250 pounds. This is another kid, like we'll talk about Jalanie George in a second, but this is just another one of those kids where you watch the film, and I think that he's just a head and shoulders just better athlete than everybody else on the field, which is so much fun to watch. It's so much fun to think about, especially when, considering DeJon Yarborough, 4-star Washington target in the 27 class we just talked about, has to go against a kid like that in practice every day. I look at what he brings to the table, and I think he's got a tremendous motor. I think he's a very versatile player and just another one of those dudes where there's so much room to add weight to his frame. If he does wind up playing more on the interior at the next level, that's not something that's necessarily going to shock me. But I look at the fact that Washington was able to get a kid like this on campus so early on in the process as a very, very good sign. And it's something we've talked about a lot on this show over the last year plus, I want to say, is Washington has done a tremendous job of developing early relationships. And I think this is one of those great examples of, this is going to be one of the most coveted pass rushers in the country by the time signing day rolls around, especially, which I'm aware it's a very long way away, but this is one of the ways that Washington has been able to find success on the recruiting trail, because we just saw it pay off with John Ioane, with how long and just strong of a relationship that was. The relationship that Scotty Graham has been able to build with 4-star running back Jeremy Adenju is one that comes to mind. You look at this 26 class and some of the guys that Washington was able to pull off just wins there. John Mills in 2025, relationships did win out at the end of the day there. There are so many examples that I can point to over these last couple of classes of Washington just doing a very good job of getting in early and just hanging around. And that's not always what's going to win out, especially in this modern age of NIL. Let's be real about that. But it's something that still absolutely matters. And that's something that this coaching staff has done very, very well. And specifically when talking about Jason Kafusi, it's something that he has done very well. And that's something you hear from a lot of these recruits. It's they really like talking to him and his plan and all of those sorts of different things. So I look at how that could make an impact on a player like Landen Wade and getting him on campus this early, what that could look like too, where I'm going to be monitoring this very closely, because if that's a kid who does decide to come back up at some point over the summer or for a game day this fall, all of a sudden, hey, we're going to be sitting here talking. Washington is firmly in the mix for 2 of these 5-star edge rushers, because Jalanie George is right there. Number 6 player in the country, according to 247 Sports Composite, number 2 edge rusher. And he released his top 6 on Friday. And like we talked about, Washington's right there in that mix alongside Auburn, Florida, Miami, Ohio State, Oklahoma. It's not going to be easy to win the day for a kid like Jalanie George. However, You go read the interview that he did with our good buddy Scott Eklund over at dogman.com. He's planning on coming back up in June, I would assume, for something like the Top Dog Camp. And he's also going to be coming back up for a game day this fall. So Washington has done a very good job of getting into the mix for yet another one of these high ceiling, super disruptive, long, strong, athletic pass rushers. And it's not easy to win out in some of these recruitments, especially when you look at, the kind of resources, the kind of track record that schools like Miami and Ohio State have put out on the defensive line a little bit more recently than Washington. But I just feel that the Huskies have done such a good job. And it goes back to what I was just saying about Jason Kaufusi, where one of the first things that Jalanie highlighted following his first visit to Washington was the plan that Jason Kaufusi has and the uniqueness of having a hands trainer with Ben Kramer in the room as well. So Washington has done a very good job of selling its uniqueness and selling some of these different ways to get some of these big time players on campus. And I can already hear people yelling at me. I understand that it's a very different sort of thing to close on some of these big name pass rushers and, where they can go get coached by Larry Johnson at Ohio State is the one you always hear. The pair of first round edge rushers that Miami just put out in this past class. Those things are very, very hard to pass up and very, very hard to sell against as well. But I've just heard from too many different sources at this point in time that Washington is doing such a very good job of just continuing to sell and sell and sell. And we've seen that. Look at where this 27 class sits right now. Look at where the 26 class wound up. Look at how many of these guys from the 2025 class were able to come in and make an early impact. This coaching staff has done a very good job of getting the guys they want. And now it's time to level up. Now it's time to say, okay, yeah, we got, JD Hill, Tavita Nonu, again, with the crystal balls maybe coming to fruition, plus Ramzak Fruin, Derek Coleman-Brusa, whoever else you want to say, John Ioane, obviously. There are so many of these names that it's okay. Yeah. Getting these guys in the room, that's great. That's exactly what you need to do. When you look at the relationships you had with some of those guys, some of the in-state players as well, that's great. Now it's all about, you've been selling in the state of Arizona for so long. You need to go out and find a way to get these things to pay off, because that's what Ohio State does. That's what Michigan does. That's what USC's been doing. That's what Oregon's been doing. And if you want to compete in this new era of the college football playoff, whether it's 12, 14, 16, 24, 100, I don't care. Whatever it is, you need to go out and you need to build a high-end pass rush every single year, because that's what those programs are doing. And it's nice to see Washington continue to throw out some of these late offers in the 2027 class as well, because I'd be remiss if I didn't mention four-star defensive tackle Sam LeJeune from Poplarville High School in Mississippi. They just got an offer, and I'm curious to see what happens here, because this is a very coveted kid, 6'3", 280 pounds, ranked as the number 105 overall player, number 10 defensive lineman in the 2027 class by the 247 Sports Composite. But I don't necessarily know if this is one that's going to pay off for Washington in the long run. He's got 4 official visits set up: Auburn, Cal, Florida State, LSU. So I looked at the film, and it's one of those things where you see it, right? He's got a nice pass rush bag for just being where he is and the position that he plays, especially at this point in his career. I think he's very explosive off the line of scrimmage. He does a really good job of getting into the backfield quickly and easily, and he's just one of those kids that's just strong as an ox. He holds the point of attack very well when defending the run. He can use that strength as advantage to just walk opposing offensive linemen back into the laps of the quarterback, and all of those sorts of things are great. And these are the kinds of prospects that you need to go out and try to find a way to, again, just win the day for however possible. And that's not an easy thing to do. But I look at what Washington wants to do, and it's nice to see these things go out and continue to see the Huskies push for some of these players all over the country, because you need to go out and win some of those battles in Texas that you weren't able to do over the last couple of years, in Jalen Battle, in Zane Rowe as well, and just find ways to get 1 or 2 of these guys to wind up on Montlake by any means necessary. Because if you can do that and then sell like, hey, look, these guys are having an early impact. It's what we've talked about at wide receiver with this trio of dudes from outside the normal recruiting footprint in Jordan Clay, Trez Davis, Mason James. If you can go out there and just show that Washington is just another place where these guys can come in and succeed early. And yeah, it's a little bit further away from home, but you're still doing it in a national conference with the exposure that the Big Ten provides and the competition level that you're going to face every single week in the Big Ten. I think all of those things are not only great selling points, but just very, very important to what all these recruits want on top of, the NIL, the relationships, whatever it is that any particular kid might be looking for. Washington has all those things. And it's about being able to just continue to push and sell that brand, which we've seen them try to do, in New Jersey, in Illinois, in Texas. And now it's just about continuing to push that further east and just see what you can do. Because if you can combine all these high-end kids on the West Coast, in Arizona, in Washington, with a couple players from Texas, a couple players from that region, and, just continuing to just expand that recruiting footprint to a national level, Washington can absolutely compete with the best teams in the nation on a year in, year out basis. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.